All right, so we're on to part two. Sorry, we'll probably have another interruption here in a minute. Keeping the kids out of the same area I'm at is generally pretty complicated at our house. So here's what I've got. We have, if cosine of theta is a half in quadrant 4, that's actually a big help. One of the things you can actually come up with the angle itself. If you go to quadrant 4 and find out where cosine of theta is 1/2, the angle's 300 degrees if you're doing it in degrees. But it's actually easier if you just realize there's an identity that says the cosine of 2 theta has 3 different identities, and one of them is 2 theta, I'm sorry, 2 times the cosine squared of theta minus 1. And what that really means, you have to be careful. Cosine squared of theta is actually the same thing as the cosine of theta quantity squared, the whole thing being squared. So if I happen to know that cosine is equal to 1/2, then I can replace that whole cosine of theta right there with 1/2, and that's what you're seeing right there. 2 cosine squared theta minus 1 means I can call it 2 times 1/2 squared minus 1. And if you simplify that, half squared is 1/4, and 2 times a fourth is a half minus 1, and you've got negative 1/2. So it's important to know when you're given that cosine of theta equals 1/2 or some other value, you're probably actually just going to replace cosine of theta with that entire value of 1/2. Okay, so next, I'll talk about solving some trig equations. There is negative 2 cosine x minus 1, and we're doing radians. It's on the interval 0 to pi. What you want to do, if it's not squared or anything like that, this is nice. If there's a single trig function, then just go ahead and solve for it. Get that cosine of x equal to negative 1/2. You add 1 to both sides. That's the first step right here. And then you divide by negative 2. Got it to this step. And then you're thinking, all right, where on the unit circle is cosine equal to negative 1/2, which is kind of like you're going left 1/2. And if I'm thinking of my unit circle in my head, even, then to go left 1/2, there's 2 angles that have that characteristic. There's 2 pi over 3, which is the top one here, and there's 4 pi over 3, which is the bottom one right here. And those are the only 2 that qualify if you're talking about radians on 0 to 2 pi interval. Okay, so we're going to go to the next one. To find all solutions means you're going to do this plus or minus 2k or 2 pi k, or if it's in degrees, it's plus or minus 360k. That's something that could happen. Okay, so those are things that we'll do eventually, but in the midst of this, there's double angle formulas sometimes, like the last one. If you have I think a couple problems before, if you have a double angle, get it out of there. Go ahead and find an identity that replaces it. Sine of 2x is 2 sine x cosine x, and you never want to cancel. So the temptation might be to cancel these cosines. Never cancel while solving. So you want to actually go and you want to set it equal to 0, factor, and cancel. If you can remember not to cancel while you're solving a trig equation, that would be awesome, because it'll eliminate some of your solutions. And I repeat it over and over again every year, and there's lots of folks that forget it, but just do your best to remember. Don't cancel those cosines. We're solving a trig equation. Get it on one side, basically set it equal to 0, and then we're going to factor out what they have in common, which is cosine. So if we factor out the cosine of x, you're left with 2 sine x minus 1. When you're in factored form, something set equal to 0, you can just set each of the factors equal to 0, which is written over here, sine of x equal to 0. And if you set, 2 sine x minus 1 equal to 0, then you can add 1 to both sides, so 2 sine x equals 1, and then divide by 2. Sine x equals 1/2, and that's what you're seeing over here to the right. Excuse me. So when is cosine of x equal to 0? That means when is the x coordinate on the unit circle equal to 0, and that's at 90 and 270. Okay, and then when is the cosine of x equal to 1/2? Is when is the y coordinate equal to 1/2, and that happens at 30 and 150 degrees. So those are your solutions all together, and then the all solutions means you're adding a rotation around the unit circle, so plus or minus 360k on any of those solutions. If I were doing radians, I would just convert this to 90 is pi over 2, and 270 is 3 pi over 2, 30 is pi over 6, 150 is 5 pi over 6, and you plus or minus 2 pi k. Okay, so down to our next page. I'm going to cut off here and then go ahead and turn the page. And keep emailing. You guys are sending some good questions.